our voted elected representatives have power in this building here. This building is a shell. Behind this building is a corporate elite that have taken over our politics. And in my view, this prostitute state has 4 pillars. The first pillar is a corrupted political system. Nearly every single one of our senior politicians, when they retire, get bought by corporations. I'll give you an example of the party that I left. Nick Clegg was a corporate lobbyist for the gas industry. David Cameron was a political lobbyist for ITV. The former chair of the Deputy Chair of Liberal Democrats is a lobbyist. David Law is the Minister for Education, his partner is a lobbyist. Chris Huhne, the Minister for Environment, his partner is a lobbyist. The Chief Executive of the Liberal Democrats has become a lobbyist. I could go on and on and on. 24 ministers from the Labour government walked straight out of this building and straight into being corporate lobbyists. Cameron's head of the general election is a corporate lobbyist. We no longer have a political class in the United Kingdom. We have a lobbying class. And they are the ones who are calling the shots. They are the reasons why we are here today, to protest against the tax on social justice and environmental justice. The House of Lords, the other end of this building, is full of corporate directors, oil directors, mining directors, you name it, they're in there. How did they get in there? They didn't stand for election. They bought their seats in our parliament. Shame on us, Britain, that we allow this to happen. In no other country, democratic country in the world, would this be tolerated. They not only buy seats for 4 years like they do in the United States, they buy a seat forever. It's a permanent seat in the House of Lords. And when you come to the funding of our political parties, note this, it's really important. The funding of our political parties directly comes from the tax haven elite, the corporate tax haven elite. Liberal Democrats, the largest donator to Liberal Democrats is Alpha Healthcare, based in the tax havens. If you look at the Labour Party, millions and millions and millions of pounds while New Labour was set in there. All of their funding nearly came not from the trade union members, not from the ordinary members of the Labour Party, but from billionaire offshore tax dodgers. No wonder Labour didn't fail to serve us, the people. I want to move on to the second pillar, and in my view the most important pillar, and the one that we keep failing to see, and the reason why there aren't thousands, hundreds of thousands here today. I want to talk about the prostituted media. In Britain, 80% of our newspapers are owned by 5 billionaires. 5 tax-dodging billionaires. That's where the real power in this country lies, not there. We need to tackle this urgently. Murdoch, Daily Mail, Lord Rothermere, the 2 Barclay brothers, and Desmond the Express. Those 5 people are the ones that we should be tackling. Cameron is not the person pulling the strings in this country. Clegg is not pulling the strings in this country. Miliband is not pulling the strings in this country. They are the rent boys. And as you saw those rent boys on the front page of the Sun, holding the Sun like the true rent boys that they are. We live in a prostitute state, my fellow citizens, and the 5 billionaires are pulling our strings as well. They not only own the newspapers, Murdoch and these guys, they own the TV stations, they own the radio stations, they own the press association, they own the press agencies, they own the book companies, they own the cinemas, they own the TV companies, the film production companies. Almost everything that you and I think about or talk about are controlled by these 5 people. It's not acceptable, and we're paying a huge price for it. because these people are trashing social justice and they're trashing environmental justice. And I say to Occupy, and I say you to today, the top target is the prostitute media. I'll go on to the third pillar of this disgusting, corrupted prostitute state. And that's the tax haven system. The reason why the rich 1% are getting richer and richer and richer is because they're not, like you and I, paying taxes. They're in the offshore British tax havens. A tax haven system protected by our political elite that are in the pockets of these rich tax dodgers. Look at it, it's hugely important. These huge tax dodging billionaires offshore are buying up our national companies, our local companies, our local shops. Almost no local shops left in Britain. No local bookshops, no local record shops. Why? Because the billionaires are offshore not paying tax with a 20% advantage on our local shopkeepers. A whole generation is being wiped out of local business people. So we are united with the local business people and workers that we are being trashed by the tax haven system. And finally, let me talk about the corrupt and perverted academia. Real tragedy. Our think tanks, our universities and our schools are now being taken over by the corporate prostitute state. If you want funding, you have to get funding from the corporations to do research in our universities. My local school in Peckham is now run by Tory donor Lord Horace, corporate right corporate billionaire. They are polluting our kids, they're polluting our students, they're polluting our academia, and most importantly, they're polluting our think tanks, our so-called think tanks. None of these think tanks will declare who's funding them. And who is funding them is the oil billionaires, the bankers, etc., etc. These tax dodgers are funding our think tanks and using them as a front to implement policy on our behalf. So those are the four pillars of our prostitute state, my fellow citizens. A corrupted political system, a perverted, prostituted media, thieving tax havens, and a perverted academia. And what are the consequences of this prostitute state? It is a huge transference of wealth from us, the people, to not only the 1%, but the 0.01% of the 1%. As we know, to Oxfam, and not just Oxfam, Forbes has said that Oxfam's stats are out of date. It's not 85 people own half the world's wealth. It's 67 in just 2 years. 67 people own more than half the world's population. 3,500 million people own less than 67 people. And what are the consequences of that? We're seeing it today in West Africa, where 3 countries are laid low by Ebola. Why are they laid low by Ebola? Because they have no decent health systems in those countries. And they have their health systems collapsing in front of Ebola. And why have we no vaccine for Ebola? Because our pharmaceutical companies are owned by the billionaire corporations. So they didn't prepare a vaccine because they didn't care what was happening in Africa, because they wanted the money from the West for our rich diseases. So the consequences of the prostitute state go right across the planet, from West Africa to our own doorstep. In Britain, under New Labour, when New Labour went into that building, the rich bosses earned 40 times the average worker on the shop floor. When New Labour walked out of that door, the bosses earned 120 times the shop floor. Trickle down is the biggest lie we've ever been told. Trickle down is actually flood up. A flood of our money, the poor's money, the middle class's money, the shopkeeper's money to the corporate rich living offshore. It was a lie, and that's the biggest, the 1%'s income during the depression went up 37%. During the recession, the richest wealth went up 37%. The poorest in Britain's wealth went down 17% during the recession. That is the consequence of the prostitute state. And second, I will come to that. Good question. I think we need to know what the problem is before we talk about solutions. The second consequence, there's only two major consequences. One is social justice being trashed. And the second consequence is our planet is being trashed. There is no economy without an environment. I got involved in political action and environmental action 22 years ago when I by accident ended up in the Yanomami, in the middle of the Amazon forest with the Yanomami people. And I saw the genocide and destruction of the Amazon 22 years ago. There were 6 million people in the Amazon when we arrived, our so-called civilization arrived. There's now less than 600,000. And that genocide goes on to this day, with shamans being massacred in the Amazon year in, year out. Yeah. We've lost 40% of the world's rainforest in my lifetime. And listen to this statistic before I go on solutions. I'm 56 years old. From the time I was born until now, we have lost 50% of the planet's bird populations, animal populations, fish populations, amphibian populations. Half of nature has been wiped out in one generation. And not only that, that's not even talking about climate change. The oceans are becoming acidic. 40% of the phytoplankton, which our food depends on in the seas, has gone because the oceans are becoming acidic. And let's talk about climate change. So-called Kyoto Treaty. Every year since the Kyoto Treaty was signed 18 years ago, global emissions have gone up 3%. Every year. We are fast running out of time if we have not run out of time. And as long as the prostitute state's in charge, the planet is going to get trashed to make their billions, and we've run out of time. And that's why I'm so privileged to be here today with the Occupy heroes. So let's talk about solutions. Yes. To me, you're our heroes. I really mean that. In the lineage of Gandhi and Mandela and Martin Luther King, Occupy are in that non-violent tradition that when the political system fails you, and it has, we have to come out in the streets and do what you're doing. I have huge admiration for what you're doing. So how do we deal with the prostitute state? There's probably a million ways. You probably have got some better ideas than mine. I'll give you a few of mine. I am not a political guru. I'm just somebody who spent 20 years inside that building with the Liberal Democrats and with environmental campaigners and in the media trying to do something, and we failed. And I now feel we've got to come out to the streets and talk and campaign. What do we need to do? I believe two things. One is first, personal responsibility. Like Gandhi said. Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. And I truly believe that's the first most important step. Because what is that step? It's about truth. It's about truth from our heart. It's no point in me coming out here and talking today and saying we need to do something about the prostitute state when I buy the Times every day. Or my electricity comes from Eon. Or I bank with Barclays. That's a hypocrisy. So the first thing is question your own hearts. Are you Gandhian? Are you truly a non-violent person in the tradition of Gandhi? So then you need to ask yourself, where do I shop? Do I shop with the billionaire Tesco's? Do I bank with Barclays? Do I give my money to Murdoch when I buy a newspaper? Where do you bank? Where do you where do you buy your electricity? Where do you buy your gas? I go on and on. Ask yourself, where do you buy your clothes? Do you buy it from Primark? Do your clothes depend on slave labour? So that's the first thing. And I assure you, if you actually choose a lifestyle that's in true with your values, you'll also be choosing a lifestyle in line with protecting the planet. Because if you avoid brands, you'll help yourself avoiding the prostitute states, tax-ridden billionaires. And the second thing is collective action. And I know that's what Occupy is about. Collective action is, in my view, we're in a situation that we have faced before. This is not the first time humanity has faced such a problem. Oligarchies have been around since history began. Rome, Athens, early 19th century Britain, 20th century America. Oligarchies have always been there, and the people have always had to rise up and tackle them. In the 19th century, Britain was ruled by aristocrats. And what happened was the people rose up in a civil movement across Britain, and they got the Reform Acts passed in the 1840s and 1860s, and they got the vote, and they took the power from the aristocrats. In the early 20th century America, the power lay with the trust funds, the corporations. And in early 20th century America, the people mobilized, and they tackled, and they got the antitrust laws through in early 20th century America. And America needs to do that again today. And we need to do what they did in the 1840s and the 1860s in Britain. And what we need today, in my view, is the equivalent. A 21st century great democratic reform act. A reform act that tackles the 4 pillars of the prostitute state. An end to the corruption of politics. Nick Clegg, if you sell another peerage, you go to jail. Miliband, if you sell another peerage, you go to jail. Cameron, if you sell another peerage, you go to jail. If you have a bank account offshore, you go to jail. And you're not allowed anywhere near this government or our political parties.
How are you going to do that?
By actually mobilising the people so we get a reform act through like they did in the 1840s. And what we need to do is to actually separate lobbying from politics. And what I mean by that is, there will always be lobbyists, there always has been, whether it's from the courts in history to the American Senate to our Parliament. There will always be lobbyists, it's part of the system. But we cannot be a lobbyist and in the system. So get out of our political parties, lobbyists, out! No longer should the lobbyists run the top of the Liberal Democrats. No longer should the lobbyists run the top of the Labour Party. No longer should the lobbyists run the top of the Tory Party. Get out! It should be illegal. Separate the two. Second one, tackle the prostituted media. If you own more than 5% of the media, no more. Murdoch owns 38% of the media. We don't want billionaires owning our media. We need a diverse press. The people must have a say in how our democratic process of the media is run. Close the tax havens down. Britain is a disgrace across the planet. We are the biggest thief from the third world, developing world you could possibly name. We give buttons in foreign aid, but we actually steal billions back from them through our tax havens. Close them down. And finally, corporations have no business in our schools, our universities and our think tanks. So I finish you to say, and I say, you do it, Occupy. The Britain is dependent on Occupy lighting a flame that goes along across Britain and inspires a 21st century great democratic reform act. Good luck and power to everybody. Thank you.